I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We thank the representative of the Secretary-General on Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Nakamitsu, for her very useful briefing. Colleagues, on the 2nd of August this year, there was a very sad and important event. The United States of America withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. In many ways, this was a very important treaty for the establishment of regional and global security architecture. This document had been agreed during the Cold War in conditions that were very difficult in international relations, and nonetheless, at that time, the leaders of the USSR and the United States were able to reach an agreement. The INF was crucial for international détente. Alongside other steps, in many ways it helped to create a climate of trust. And in those conditions of trust in the world, changes were able to take place. These changes that the whole of the international community now thinks were extremely important. For the first time in many decades, humanity had an opportunity to turn away from confrontation and to deal with substantive issues of development. Dealing with those issues would make all of our lives better. For some time, the treaty was closely implemented by both Russia and the United States. However, it gradually became clearer and clearer that this treaty, like other agreements on disarmament and arms control, had become uncomfortable for our American partners, who were convinced of their own exclusivity and who were ever more decisively imposing on others a unilateral scheme of international relations. The first victim of these Washington's ambitions was the ABM Treaty in 2003. Russia had actively fought since the end of the 1990s to maintain that treaty. Immediately after this, the Americans stated that they had plans to deploy missile launchers for a missile defense system in Eastern Europe, allegedly to protect them from a threat from Iran. In response to our concerns, we were told that these pieces of equipment certainly couldn't be used against Russia. Nonetheless, when the first of them was deployed in Romania, it became obvious that they could easily be re-equipped to launch Tomahawk missiles, which are banned under the INF Treaty. We immediately drew attention to this. Now it is completely obvious that we were right. On the 18th of August, only 2 weeks after exiting the treaty, Washington carried out a test launch of a medium-range rocket using this Mk-41 launch system. Now, from the beginning of August of this year, there are no limits on the development and deployment of similar systems. In this way, following the denunciation of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the latest piece of the arms control architecture has been kicked away, an architecture that at its time allowed for the development and conclusion of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the START Treaty. Incidentally, that treaty will run out in February 2021 and is also at risk. Key figures in the current American administration have repeatedly, in both public and private, given to understand that they have no interest in maintaining the START Treaty in its current form. In parallel, virtually from the first day of exiting the INF Treaty, American officials have begun to make threats and statements that leave no doubt that Washington, firstly, had intended this situation as it now stands, and secondly, had consistently and deliberately violated the INF Treaty for some time already. How would it be possible otherwise for the head of the Pentagon, Mark Esper, to announce in the first days of August the opportunity to deploy medium and short-range land missiles in just a few months? It wouldn't be possible to establish such weapons in such a short amount of time. Madam President, We didn't call this meeting to expose the hypocrisy of our American colleagues. Today, it is obvious to any old non-biased disarmament expert that this is an incontrovertible fact. And however much they might harp today in our meeting on the idea that it was the actions of Russia that undermined the INF Treaty, the most recent steps taken by Washington are eloquent evidence to the contrary. This is not even the issue. Quite honestly, today, mainly, we are not turning to our American partners because everything is clear in the situation with them. We're very surprised by the position that is being stubbornly taken by our European colleagues. You may remember that as recently as December last year, Russia put forward a draft General Assembly resolution supporting the INF Treaty. It contained no criticism of the United States and only called for diplomatic efforts to be strengthened or supported to deal with any issues connected to security and the national interests of all UN member states without exception. We unambiguously warned at that time that the demise of the INF wouldn't just undermine the NPT Article 6, but would also lead to a new arms race. At that time, many partners listened closely to us, but not the European allies of Washington. I have a question to you. Are you happy today that in December you preferred to press the red button? Do you really not understand that in what you've done with the Americans, step by step, you are returning to a historical situation when missiles were targeting European cities from different sides? For our part, we would not be the first to make use of such measures. However, considering that our American colleagues are clearly rubbing their hands and want to flex their muscles, then it's possible that that situation that I described could happen quite soon. On the whole, do you realize that because of the US's geopolitical ambitions, we are all one step from an arms race that cannot be controlled or regulated in any way? We are very concerned by the prospect of that. But our American colleagues, it seems, are not. In many ways, if you believe President Donald Trump, America is ready for an arms race because allegedly it is possible for it to overcome any of its potential enemies in material and technical sense. To benefit of that logic, in the tradition of the best American Westerns, we can look at the figures. The military budget of the United States, only according to public data, is around $700 billion US. The budget of NATO is $1.4 trillion US. These are just rough figures. To compare, the budget of Russia would be around 60 million, so that this is 20 times less than NATO's. Now, after the US's risky activities, all of these figures could increase. The American president has already set the question about that. Incidentally, expenditure on developing weapons that contravene the INF Treaty were included in the American military budget a long time before this document was given its death sentence. But allegedly, Russia is nonetheless guilty of all of this. Madam President, just think how much good has been done for sustainable development, for helping poor people and for helping developing people of developing countries. Think about how much could have been done with the money that our Western colleagues have spent on military expenditure. In this context, what our American partners are doing with the budget for peacekeeping operations and the practice of paying their contribution to the UN budget at the very last moment, which includes some $10 billion US now. This looks not only petty, but it also looks like they don't have any respect for the other member states of this global organization. We aren't scared to say this to their faces, but what about you? Are you going to try and evade your share of the responsibility for what's happening, and also allegedly bowing to an allegedly Russian and Chinese threat? Will the future generations forgive you this? Despite everything that I've said, we still haven't lost faith that common sense and an instinct of self-defense will nonetheless win out among our Western partners, because what's at stake here is the very existence of humanity. The question is only how many means and efforts will be wasted until the possibility for progress and cooperation is lost. For our part, we were and we remain ready for any serious dialogue to guarantee strategic stability and security. And if this depended only on us, then we certainly wouldn't have reached the dangerous situation that we're in today. That said, we remain realists. Breaking things does not mean building them. And to launch a more or less sustainable and effective format for discussing issues of strategic stability and arms control, as is shown by history, might take years, if not decades. But solving the problem, including the problem coming from Washington's irresponsible activities, is something we need to do today. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation.